So this is section 8.1, the first section of chapter 8. We are going to be adding, subtracting, and also classifying polynomials, okay? So we first need to understand what a polynomial is. Anybody know what the word poly means? Many, right? That's right. So if we take a look at the definition of a polynomial, it's simply many terms. It's just a variable expression. So we've dealt with variable expressions before. Right here we have variable expressions. It has many terms. Right here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms in all. What separates the terms? The minuses or the pluses. Okay. So how many terms are right here on this polynomial? How many terms? Count them. I already did. 4. So this has 4 terms. There's a polynomial. In this section, we're going to be dealing with only a single variable polynomial, or I should say we're going to only choose to focus on the single variable polynomials. Now, what do I mean by single variable? Just x's, right? Now, there are polynomials that have multiple variables, like this guy right here, like let's say 3x squared minus 2xy minus 5y to the third. That has 2 different types of variables, and we can classify this, we can work with this, but we're going to choose not to mess with polynomials that have more than one variable. So we're going to skip those type of questions on the homework. We're going to focus in on polynomials that just have one variable, like x's, or maybe just y's. Or we are going to simplify some that have multiple variables, but classifying, we're only going to stick to the single variable polynomials. Now, if we continue reading with the definition, it says the term must be real, not imaginary, and it must have non-negative exponents. If you have a negative exponent, it becomes a fraction, and we can never have a variable in the denominator. So let me give you some examples of non-polynomials, right? So like this guy right here, yeah, there's 2 terms, but this is a negative exponent, which will make it a fraction right here with the variable in the denominator. So that would not be a polynomial, okay? Or just a simple fraction with the variable in the denominator, that would also not be a polynomial. Okay, anyhow, so what is a polynomial? It's simply a variable expression. There's variables in there, there's math operations, plus, minus, exponents, technically multiplication between the 2 and the x. But there's a lot more to learn, or a lot more vocab we need to cover. The second vocab term is the degree. What is the degree? It's the highest exponent of the variable or variable expression. Okay, so look at this variable expression I gave you, and what's the degree on this guy? What's the degree? 3. Okay, so the degree is 3. What's the degree? It's the highest exponent. Okay, so the exponent here is 1. The exponent here is 3. Right here there's no variable. Right here the exponent's 2. So the highest exponent is 3. So when I ask you what's the degree, you're going to say 3. And guess what, guys? Those are the simple type of questions we're going to see on Friday's quiz. So this whole section in 8.1 is really easy. All you have to do is pay attention right now, and you'll be able to answer these like free points on a quiz. Okay, let's look at the next vocab term. Standard form. Standard form. Now again, form, you guys remember slope-intercept form? Y equals mx plus b? Form is just the way it looks. So a standard form polynomial, it has to be organized. We need to make it look like a certain way. And what is that? It's a polynomial written in order from largest exponent to smallest. So as you could see, this polynomial up here is definitely not in standard form. Okay? So let's rewrite this above polynomial in standard form. What should my first term be? Should it be 2x? No. What's the first term of my standard form polynomial? You're going to start with the highest exponent. You want from highest exponent down to the smallest. So the first term is this guy right here. So I need to write down this x to the third with a minus in front of it. That's going to be our first term. Negative x to the third. Okay? Now what's the next term that I need to write if I want to write it in standard form? What's the next term? After x to the third? x to the second. So we're talking about this guy right here, the minus 3x squared. That's the second term. Minus 3x squared. That's my second term if I'm writing in standard form. And then for my third term, what's my next term?
1.
X to the 1, so that's the 2x. That needs to go next. And this is a positive 2x. So I'm going to put it as plus 2x. And now what's my last term? The one that doesn't have anything, the 5. The plus 5 is my very last term. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this polynomial is not in standard form. This is the same polynomial, but it's organized in standard form. It's rearranged in standard form. And that's going to be another type of question that you're going to see on Friday's quiz. I'm going to give you a polynomial that's all mixed up like this guy, and you're going to have to rearrange it or rewrite it in standard form. And what does that mean? You take your highest exponent term, you write that first. You take your next highest exponent term, you write that second. Then the next one, write that third. And your last term should always be the number without a variable. And technically, that's called the constant. And let's talk about these vocab words, leading coefficient and constant. Let me make more space. Okay, guys, so the last two vocab words of the section, leading coefficient. What's the leading coefficient? It's the coefficient, which means the number of the first term of a polynomial in standard form. Okay? So it's the number that's out in the front. If somebody's leading a parade, that's going to be the person that's out in the front, marching in the front of the parade, right? So a leading coefficient is the term that's out in the front when it's in order in standard form. So a lot of people are going to make the mistake. When I say what's the leading coefficient, if I give you this guy, a lot of people are going to say 2, and that's going to be wrong. Okay? Because in order for you to identify the leader, the leading coefficient, it has to be in order in standard form. So this is in order in standard form. So what's the leading coefficient right here?
1.
Close? -1. So the leading coefficient up there is -1. That's the leading coefficient of that standard form polynomial. And then we have the constant term. It's the number to the far right without a variable of a standard form polynomial. Okay, so the constant term is the number that's all by itself without a variable to the far right when it's in order. Okay, that's the constant. And that makes total sense. The word variable, when you say it varies, that means it changes. But if you say something's constant, right? If somebody's consistently bothering you, that means that they're bothering you all the time, right? So a constant never changes. The +5 never changes. A -5 never changes. A +3 never changes, right? So a constant is simply the number that's being added or subtracted at the very end. So in this case, the constant is +5. Okay, so do we understand these vocab words? Yeah? Okay, guys, so this is the page of notes that you just received right now. And of course, it has all the vocab words that we were talking about. Polynomial, many terms, degree, standard form, leading coefficient, constant term. We need to be responsible for understanding each of those vocab words. Now let's move on to this next section, which is classifying polynomials. All right, it says classifying polynomials. So what I would like you to do right now is to circle or box in this group right here, and let's write down first name right there, first name. Okay, so polynomials, we're going to give them a first and last name, right? And over here, box this one in. This is going to be your last name, or the last name of the polynomial. Okay? So the first name, as you could read right here, the first name is based on the degree. And we should all know from the notes that we just saw, degree is the highest exponent. So if you have a highest exponent of 4, the first name is going to be quartic, right? If you have the highest exponent, if there is no exponent, like if you just have, let's say, x plus 2. Well, right there, the highest exponent is the invisible 1 up there, so that first name would be a linear, right? So this is linear, and then the last name is based on the number of terms. So right here, there's actually 1 term, 2 terms. So linear is the first name, and over here, there's 2 terms, so that'd be binomial. So linear binomial is the name of this polynomial right here, okay? So polynomial is just the name of a variable expression, but if you want to be more specific and classify it and give it a first and last name, the first name is based on the degree, which is the highest exponent, and the last name is based on how many terms it actually has. So let me erase this. Let me put a different one. What if I had, how about 3x to the third minus 2x plus 5? Okay, so right there, what would the first name right there be? You got to go off of the degree, which is the highest exponent. What's the highest exponent? 3. So what's the first name? Cubic. Now, the last name is based on how many terms you have. How many do we have? We have 1, 2, 3. So what's the last name? Trinomial. So if I tell you classify this, which I will on Friday's quiz, you're going to say cubic trinomial. Cubic trinomial. That's the name of that thing. So classifying is really easy. You just have to understand these notes. The first name is based on the degree, the highest exponent. Okay? Now let's say you had something like with the degree 5 or degree 7, and they ask you to classify it. That's where you would say, oh, this is a polynomial that has a 7th degree. You know? But we're only going to stick to these guys, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And the number of terms, mono means 1, bi, like a bicycle, means 2, tricycle, 3, and 4 or more, poly. Yes? So, I hope we understand these notes. Let's look at the examples down here. So, I would cover up the right-hand columns with your hand. Now let's just look at these guys and look at them together here. Or don't even look at your paper, just look at the board up here. So if I wanted to give this a name, the number 6, right? You could say, oh, what is the number 6? Is there even a variable right there? No, it's just a constant, right? So it's kind of ridiculous. You could say constant monomial, but that's pointless. It's not even a polynomial, it's just a constant, right? Now I know over there it says constant monomial. I would just classify this as a constant. Now right here, what's your degree? 1, so that's linear. And then how many terms do you have? Remember, terms are what's separated by a plus or a minus. So right here it's just 1 term. So what would we classify this first and last name? Linear monomial, right? Again, this is first name what? This one. Linear. How many terms? 2 terms. So linear what? Binomial. That's right. What's the degree here? 2. So what's that first name? Quadratic. How many terms? Trinomial. So quadratic trinomial is that guy. Quadratic trinomial. How about this guy? First name? Cubic binomial. How about this guy? Quartic. How many terms? Polynomial. There's 4. 4 or more, we just call it a polynomial. So this stuff's really easy. All you have to do is pay attention and understand the vocab and be able to use that vocab. I will give you some of these on the quiz and ask you to classify it with the first and last name. So just follow along with me right here. On this handout it says, please classify the following polynomials according to degree and number of terms. So number 1, what do you guys say, guys? First and last name, what is number 1?
Linear binomial.
Excellent. It's linear because the highest exponent is 1, and it's a binomial because there's 2 terms. How about number 2?
Quadratic trinomial.
Quadratic, because the highest exponent is 2. Quadratic trinomial, because there's 3 terms. Quadratic trinomial for number 2. And Jethro, how about number 3?
Number 3?
Yeah, this guy right here. First, you start with the highest exponent. And what's that first name? Cubic. All right. We have the first name down.
And last name is
Polynomial. Okay. How about Nayla, number 4? What do you say? What's the highest exponent right there? And what do we name it? Quartic. Quartic. Monomial. Thank you very much. Easy? Okay. How about number 5? It says state the leading coefficient of number 3 above. So here's number 3. What's the leading coefficient? Is it 6? Is it 2? Is it -4? Is it 1? What's the leading coefficient? Now remember, if you look at your definition on your notes, the leading coefficient is the number that's out in front of your first term, the number. So like up on number 1, the leading coefficient is the number 2. On number 2, the leading coefficient is the number 7. So what's the leading coefficient right here? The number in front of x, which is 1. There's an invisible 1 right there. So the leading coefficient of number 3 is 1. Okay, how about number 6? State the constant for number 2. What is the constant of number 2? Is it 7? Is it 2? Is it -1? Is it 3? The constant is 3 for number 2 above. Number 7, state the degree of number 1. What's the degree? 1, that's right. The degree of number 1 is 1 because the degree is the highest exponent and the highest exponent is 1 right there. Okay, so now I want to focus in on this second part. It says rewrite the following in standard form, and then they want you to state the LC, the leading coefficient, and then state the constant, and then state the degree, and then classify it. So let's first rewrite this in standard form. What should my first term be when I rewrite in x to the third power? Minus 2x squared, and then? Plus 5. Okay, so this in blue is now the standard form polynomial. Okay, now looking at the standard form polynomial, what is the leading coefficient? The leading coefficient is 1. That's right. So we're going to put a 1 right there for 8b. And then 8c, state the constant. What's the constant? 5. Okay. And 8d, state the degree. Okay. And 8e, classify it. Now when we classify it, we don't want to classify this guy. We want to classify the standard form one. So give it a first and last name based on your notes. Cubic trinomial. Excellent. Cubic because the highest exponent, the degree is 3. Trinomial because there's 3 terms. Cubic trinomial. So right here, to finish up the lesson, we already know how to classify it, but in addition to classifying, we need to be able to add and subtract polynomials. So how do we add or subtract polynomials? We already know how to do it. What is it? It's simply combining like terms. We've combined like terms in the past. You combine the x's with the x's, the numbers with the numbers, and the x squares with the x squares, the x to the thirds with the x to the thirds. Now, combining like terms is just adding or subtracting depending on the sign that's in front. Now, if you read along right here, the only thing you need to be careful for is to make sure that you distribute the minus sign in front of the parentheses before you start combining. So let's take a look at our homework. And on our homework, we're doing numbers 1 through 10 because that's just the simplifying part, the finding the add or subtract, sum or difference. But we're not classifying right there, so that's fine. And notice that we do have more than one variable. We have x's and y's, but that's not a problem. It's easy to add or subtract as long as you add the x's with the x's, y's with the y's. But we're going to skip the middle part. So we're not doing 11 through 16. And we are going to jump to the second half because the second half does have all just x's, just x's. There is no x's and y's or ABCs. It's just one variable. So we're going to skip that middle part of the homework. On this first part, adding or subtracting polynomials, all you have to do is combine like terms. So if I take a look at number 1, notice that there's nothing to distribute in the front of the first parenthesis. There's nothing to distribute. And over here there's a plus sign. And even if you were to distribute a plus sign, nothing will change. Okay? So in other words, I do not need the parentheses. So I could just pretend that they're not there. I could just scratch them out. Okay? So what do I need to do? I need to add the x's with the x's. What's 2 plus 4? 6. And we're talking about x's. And then I'm going to combine this positive 3y with this positive 9y. And what do I get? 12y. Easy, right? And that's it. Now, when we jump to something that has a minus, that's what I'm talking about over here on the notes, where it says, make sure that you distribute the minus sign in front of the parentheses before you start combining. So like on number 1, there was nothing to distribute. But on number 3, we do have a minus sign to distribute. So when I distribute this minus sign, I need to put the minus sign in front of the 2a. That'll give me a minus 2a. And I need to put the minus sign in front of that positive 4b, which will make it a negative 4b. Now notice that there's nothing to distribute out here in the front. So I'm just going to bring down the 5a and the plus 9b. And now I'm going to combine like terms. I'm going to start with the a's because standard form, you want to be organized. Let's start alphabetical order your different variables. So 5a and minus 2a, that would be 3a. And then we have positive 9b with a negative 4b. What's that? Positive 5b. And it's important that we put a positive because it is a polynomial that needs to be separate. Those two terms need to be separated with a plus or a minus depending on what it is. And it is positive, so we put a plus. And that's it. That's your answer for number 3. And that's as hard as it gets. Let me see. Try to find a harder one. 7. I guess 7 is probably the hardest math you're going to do in this whole worksheet. So 7, what do I need to do? I need to distribute that minus sign. Minus sign on the 2d, that'll be a negative 2d. Minus sign on that positive 5, it'll make it a negative 5. Let's bring down the rest. D squared minus d plus 5. And now let's combine like terms. And since we want our answers in standard form always, let's start with the highest exponent term, the d squared. Is there anything I could combine that d squared with? Is there another d squared? No. So that's just the first part of your answer, d squared. How about the second term? I want to combine this negative d with this negative 2d. So if that's negative 3 of those d's, right? And how about the last term, the plus 5 and the minus 5, the constant at the very end? What happens with the plus 5 and the minus 5? They cancel out. They disappear. So ladies and gentlemen, this is my answer right here. Okay? And you know what? Just for funsies right here, for kicks, what would this, how about this? What's the degree?
1.
What's the degree?
2.
2. Highest exponent, right? How many terms do we have?
2.
2. Okay. What's the leading coefficient?
1.
What's the constant? Nothing.
0.
0, right? There is no constant. Okay. What would we classify this as first and last name?
Quadratic binomial.
There you go. Quadratic binomial. So the homework's not going to ask you to do this, but it's always good to practice, right? And I'm not going to classify something that has different variables. I'm only going to classify something that has a single variable, like right here, it's just d's, right? Okay, so we're skipping the second part of the homework, and the third part is to rewrite the polynomial in standard form and then identify the leading coefficient. I would go further. I would identify a leading coefficient, and I would actually practice classifying it with the first and last name. So number 17, let's rewrite it in standard form. What's that going to be? First term? 2x squared, and then?
3x.
Plus 3x, and then? Plus 1. And it says identify the leading coefficient. What's the LC? What's the leading coefficient? 2. Okay. What else does it ask on the instructions? State the, that's it. State the leading coefficient. That's lame. Okay, how about you give me the first and last name? Quadratic. Trinomial. And that's it. I just want to finish off this video. I want to finish off this video by explaining a couple of things or reiterating a couple of things. Right here, we are not multiplying, right? We're not multiplying. We're adding and subtracting. So exponents will not change, okay? So when you combine the negative d with the negative 2d, it doesn't become negative 3d squared. You're not multiplying them, right? You're just combining. So be very careful with that. So like let's say I was doing number 2, right? It's adding. You're just combining like terms. You're not multiplying. So The plus sign indicates you don't even have to worry about the parentheses. You could just forget about the parentheses. Okay? And then you could combine the t's with the t's. So if I combine 5t with 4t, what do I get? 9t, not 90, but yeah, 9t. Okay? It's not 9t squared, right? And we are going to multiply on the next section, 8.2. And yeah, if you're multiplying the 5t times 4t, then it becomes 20t squared. But right here, we're not multiplying. It's just combining like terms, so the exponents do not change. So if I do combine the 6s with the 8s, well, that's going to be a positive 14s, not 14s squared. So don't mess with exponents, guys, right here, because we are not multiplying. We're just combining like terms, okay?